Namaskar to all of you. I feel inspired today to start with a few mantras in the absence of a singer. Om Tatsaviturvaram Rupam Jyoti Parasya Dhimahi Yannaha Satyena Deepayet Yannaha Satyena Deepayet Om Tat Saviturvaram Rupam Jyoti Parasya Dhimahi Yannaha Satyena Deepayet Yannaha Satyena Deepayet Om Tat Saviturvaram Rupam Jyoti Parasya Dhimahi Yannaha Satyena Deepayet Yannaha Satyena Deepayet Akhanda Mandalakaram Vyaptam Yena Characharam Tadpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Ajnanam Temeram Dhasya Jnananjanam Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Gurur Brahma Gurur Vishnu Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha Gurur Sakshat Param Brahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So this is a series that we are doing on Sri Aurobindo's book called Synthesis of Yoga. And our previous talk was on the chapter Sacrifice. And we reflected upon the true meaning of sacrifice and the importance of sacrifice on the path of yoga. We started with the question that if God created us out of love, did He send us here to enjoy every moment or to sacrifice ourselves? So the question was the true meaning and the importance of sacrifice on the path of yoga. To share a brief on that, the divine created matter and along with that also created a saving power or a sacrificial power present in all forms of creations, which constantly illuminates, harmonizes, balances, and transforms matter. And this sacrificial power present in all, may be called as the divine soul. And the first step on the path of yoga is to acknowledge and to be grateful to this background sacrificial power which constantly is illuminating and balancing our life. And as Dr. Bijlani shared last time, that one is to acknowledge it, but also in our action, even whatever we give is also being received from somewhere. And it is important to acknowledge that whatever we give out in this world is also being received from somewhere deep within, from this sacrificial power. So an acknowledgement and gratitude to this divine soul. Secondly, irrespective of the manipulations of the ego, an acknowledgement that the law of sacrifice always takes over. The law of sacrifice being that there is always a constant exchange that any form of creation has with its environment. There is a constant giving and receiving. And through this giving and receiving, through the means of this giving and receiving, there is a constant evolution of that form and also the whole universe. The more consciously this exchange happens, the more progress and evolution, the more fulfillment the individual feels through the process. And the more unconsciously the exchange happens, the more painful and less fulfilling the process is, and one derives a mechanical minimum out of the progress or the potential progress one could have had through that exchange. So a conscious exchange is actually the process of sacrifice, and to truly have a conscious exchange, one needs to go beyond the superficiality of separation and ego and go to the depths of our being, touch the depths of the being from where one can feel the oneness and unity with all around us. And from there emerges a natural, complete self-giving, which may be termed as sacrifice, a complete mutual self-giving. And from that, if it is practiced sincerely, there are three natural outcomes. The first, that it takes us to the heights of love and devotion. Just the act of complete self-giving evokes that love and devotion within us. It requires a constant remembrance of the divine center within us, which takes us closer to the supramental. And it also dissolves all supports of the superficial ego that we take in our action. So moving forward, this process of entire self-giving is not manifested in us in one day. This process is also of a gradual flowering, and it's a long journey. And Sri Aurobindo talks about two measures of growth on the process of this flowering of sacrifice within us. How can we measure, are we growing along this path? The first being the growth of those elements in our nature which make us receptive, which bring us closer to the divine. Those elements being love, concentration, receptivity, purity, peace, For that matter, all the virtues that Mother has talked about. And the second measure being a more and more progressively intense experience of the divine presence, power, and its manifestation in our being. The first, the growth of the virtues in our nature, is obvious and easy to understand. But the second element, which is the growth of the experience of the divine, is equally important. One can look at it with the analogy of a garden of flowers. And the measure of the growth of a garden of flowers would be the kind of flowers, the number of flowers that are blooming and blossoming in that garden. But also a key element there is the behind the scene involvement of the gardener in the garden. And same way in our process of yoga, the flowers are the virtues, but it calls for a more and more intense presence of the gardener or the divine power and presence in our being. An experience of the divine presence in our being. And what is this divine experience? Since the divine itself is infinite, the gateway or the realization through which one goes through a divine experience can also not be one pathway or one gateway or one kind of realization. And hence different individuals, different sadhaks go through different experiences and different kinds of realizations on the way. For some, it starts with an inward experience of the divine presence in the depths of the other being. For some, it is a transcendental experience, going beyond the universe into the absolute as the first experience of the divine. For some, it is experienced outside in an individual or in a form of the divine, a figure of Godhead, in a guru, or as a universal form of the divine or Shakti. Each of these is a beautiful gateway into the divine realization, but if one is content with either one of them, there is a possibility of aloofness, as in case of a transcendental experience. There is a possibility of being caught up in consciousness traps and illusions in an inward or in an outward experience, where one may feel that I have experienced the divine, but one may still be caught up in the illusions and the falsehoods. And hence, Sri Aurobindo writes that it cannot be reached by the exclusive pursuit of a single line of identity till that is raised to its absolute. It cannot be reached by an exclusive pursuit of a single line of identity, whether it's transcendental or inward or outward. It must harmonize many aspects of the infinite. An integral consciousness with a multiform, dynamic experience is essential for the complete transformation of our nature. A multiform, dynamic experience. Our whole nature, which again is like a garden, full of very different kinds of flowers. It has the mind, it has the vital, it has the physical, it has the intellect, it has the heart, it has emotions. So it cannot be through a gardener who just knows how to plant two different kinds of flowers. It needs a dynamic gardener. It needs a dynamic realization of the divine in its, as he says, an integral consciousness with a multiform dynamic experience. Going one step further, the question is that is a static experience, even of these three fundamental realizations, what we talked about, a transcendental experience of being beyond the universe, or an inward experience of being a silent witness, or an outward experience of infinite omnipresence and seeing the divine everywhere. Is that static experience also enough to be called as an integral experience or an integral consciousness of multiform dynamic experience? And Sri Aurobindo answers these beautifully through these lines. If a departure from the world and its activities, a supreme release and quietude were the sole aim of the seeker, the three great fundamental realizations would be sufficient for the fulfillment of his spiritual life. If we just seek liberation, if we seek mukti or nirvana, if that is the ultimate aim of a sadhak, then these three fundamental realizations are in a way sufficient. But if one truly wants to make the process dynamic and effective, not just liberated, if one truly wants to align oneself to the yoga of the nature and the purpose of the divine towards the humanity and the universe, the manifest universe, then maybe there is something beyond that we need to realize. And that Sri Aurobindo starts by explaining that here on each line of approach, on each of these three lines of realization, he is confronted with a constant duality, a separation between two terms of existence that seem to be opposites, and their opposition to be the very root of the riddle of the universe. So along all these three fundamental realizations, one experiences a certain sense of duality and opposition, and in finding their true relationship, one arrives at answers to some basic riddles to this universe. And let's explore each of these individual fundamental realization one by one, starting with a transcendental experience. If one goes with this experience, this transcendental experience of going beyond this universe, it is an experience of the absolute. It is an experience of infinitism, of liberation, of blissfulness. But the moment one comes down back into the universe, there is fragmentation, there is struggle, there is a certain degree of disharmony, there is good and bad, there is right and wrong. And then it is so easy for us to label this transcendent or the Brahman as the true reality, and this experience of fragmentation as Maya or unreal or an illusion. But here, if we explore this experience further, as we deepen this experience, take it to its heights, one discovers that it is the Brahman which is the creator of this duality. And Sri Aurobindo calls this duality as duality of a half light and darkness. Not light and darkness, but half light and darkness. And Brahman is the creator of this half light and darkness. And it is the means for the Brahman to express its absolute light through this half light and darkness, and express this absolute light into the creation, leading to its evolution. So this very duality is a creation of the Brahman and is the means of the expression of the absolute light into the creation for the purpose of its evolution. One can feel the difference between these two different paradigms. From one paradigm, it's an opposite duality, and from another, it is an experience of unition, which Sri Aurobindo expresses in the words a biune duality. And one can experience it in one's breath. The experience of the transcendent, as in a samadhi state, brings a certain stillness to the breath. Whereas an experience of the relationship, the true relationship between the Brahman and Maya, Brahman seen as the creator of the duality, expressing its absolute light through it, brings a certain rhythmicness to the breath, which is active, which is dynamic, and which is coherent. So this is first of the three fundamental realizations unified in a paradigm. The second realization is, as the seeker goes within, we discover a witnessing self, an observer, a silent observer on one side, and on the other side the observed, which is the Prakriti, which can be seen as a mechanical outward movement of forces of tamas, rajas and sattva. And one can see the two as separate, the witness self as the Purusha and the Prakriti as the outward movement. But here also there is a true relationship between this static and dynamic element, because this silent witnessing Purusha is a kind of a silent support to the activity of the dynamic Prakriti. It is a silent sanction to the activity of Prakriti. And if it withdraws that silent support, if it withdraws that sanction, Prakriti gradually comes to a standstill. It may, in its desperation, become a little more amplified for a while, but eventually it comes down to its stillness. So Purusha is a silent support or a sanctioner to the Prakriti. And then Purusha also carries this Prakriti within itself as a potential energy. And it can throw it out, project it out into the world in form of action through an intention and purpose. So Purusha carries the Prakriti within itself also. And then when Prakriti goes out into the action, it carries Purusha as an essence within itself. So Prakriti also carries Purusha within itself as an essence. And that is the true relationship between the Purusha and Prakriti, which is unified here. And this has some beautiful practical value in our own daily life. We all talk about the Sakshi Bhav or the witness, and it's wonderful to experience the power of witnessing, which has the capacity to bring the whole being, the mind with its all its thoughts, and the vital with its movements of possession, satisfaction, dissatisfaction, all of them into a certain stillness. That is the power of witnessing or Sakshi Bhav. And then from there, from that stillness, if we create an intention, we can give out action in the universe which is focused and clear and has the maximum possibility of manifesting itself. And then if we in the action attach to the essence of the action or the Purusha in the action or our dynamic movement, it allows us not to attach to the outcome, not to be attached to the outer form of the action, not to be attached to the fruit of the action, yet be in that dynamic action through an attachment with the essence. It's like talking right now without being attached to what is being said and the outer form or the tones of the speech, but being attached to the essence of what is being expressed, which carries the Purusha, and hence brings a natural detachment to our dynamic movements in our day-to-day life. Hence, this is a unified experience of Purusha and Prakriti, which is the second fundamental realization. The third fundamental realization is of seeing the divine outside as a personality or as an impersonality. Very often, a meditative experience of the divine is seen as a impersonal force or an impersonal presence penetrating our being, and through its illuminating power, illuminating the mind with the knowledge, through its love, illuminating the vital and the emotions, and through its power, harmonizing and strengthening the vital. But along the same lines, if one goes into the depths of the heart, the same impersonal divine can be experienced as a personality or as a Godhead. In any divine form, a bhakti yogi would see the divine as a guide, as a master, or as a father, or as a mother. So a very personal or a personalized experience in form of a personality the bhakti yogin will have. And this is very often experienced that a bhakti yogin will be so absorbed in this experience of the divine as a personality, whereas a kriya yogi or a jnana yogi would be so absorbed in this experience of the divine as a impersonal presence, light and power. So here also there emerges a kind of a duality, and Sri Aurobindo talks about seeing both of them as two wings of the spiritual ascension. So both are equally important and are like a right and left wing of a bird which is ascending towards the supramental, where there is in the supermind, beyond mind, there is a unition of both the impersonal and personal into an integral reality. So through this, Sri Aurobindo unifies the experience of the third fundamental realization, which is that of impersonality and personality. And hence, sacrifice, which is a conscious exchange, calls out for an experience of the divine which is integral in nature, and hence brings one closer and closer and unites one with the Lord of the sacrifice or the divine along all three lines, and an identity with the divine as a divine soul brings close to the divine with love, and also brings an identity in terms of one's nature or transforming one's dynamic aspect, and hence bringing out all the three outcomes of the three paths of yoga, which is the Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and the Jnana Yoga mentioned in Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Having looked at and explored in a certain depth the experience of the divine, and it naturally evokes an aspiration in us to be able to grow into this experience, but yet coming back to the here and now, our current day-to-day life, we are faced with the question that how does one bring this experience and this kind of a sacrifice, a conscious exchange, into our day-to-day life? Because our current life is still built upon systems which are based on an unconscious exchange, which are based on our physical separation and individuality. So how does one bring this into life, and what does one do with one's outer life? It is a question, one of the most common questions for any sadhak and also for anybody looking at spirituality from outside. Does one abandon the outer life or outward actions completely because they are not in sync with this integral experience and start creating entirely a new life? Or one goes on in engaging, accepts the life the way it is right now, and engage in the outer life the way it is, and kind of lead a life of split personality, where on one end we are talking about this integral realization, and on the other end we are going on about our life in the same fashion. Or come up with some mental rules or ethical or moral ideas of do's and don'ts, or follow a religious rule book which says that this is good to do, this is not good to do. So where really is the perfect answer? Definitely not in either of these three, because if we reject our outer life the way it is, it's important to acknowledge that these outer systems also carry the divine as a half-veiled manifestation. And hence it's important to engage in them. And also it would be inappropriate to live the life of a split personality and subject our nascent realization to the same old patterns. And also it may be inappropriate to build up just ethical and moral rules, because all that ethical and moral rules can do is to a certain degree limit our vital tendencies. It doesn't have the capacity to transform nature. In one of the previous talks, we used the example of smoking. It is easy to say smoking is bad, I will not smoke. But this being seen as a mental rule may not translate entirely into action, or one may end up suppressing the vital impulse for a while, but eventually it bursts like a pressure cooker and one ends up engaging it in even more. So mental rules and ethical rules have some importance, but they ultimately do not transform the vital nature of our being. So, where really is the perfect answer to this question? And the fact is that there is no perfect answer at the level of the mind or at the level of vital or physical. The perfect answer truly lies only at the level of the supramental, which can take into the account the uniqueness of every individual, the uniqueness of every moment to moment situation, and yet act with perfection. But what is it that in the here and now, in our being, that we can hook onto? Because, with all honesty, we have not yet evolved to the supramental consciousness, and we are all beings in transition. So, in this transitional state, what is it that we can hook onto which becomes our guiding light? And that Sri Aurobindo expresses as, in the depths of our being, the psychic being. And if this psychic being or a psychic presence is truly liberated, the nature of this psychic being is that it is intimately in touch with our mind, body, and vital as well. Yet at the same time, if in a liberated state it is present, it always opens us upwards. It always brings up the divine impulsion as a priority. It stamps its authority upon the mind and the vital and the physical, and allows us to transform the nature. And hence, the psychic being is that hook which has the capacity for us to embrace our whole nature, yet do the best what is required in the present moment. And Sri Aurobindo expresses this through these words. It can be the only opening in the now is of the now 9/10 concealed inmost soul or psychic being that is already there but not commonly active within us. That is the inner light we must liberate. So he uses a beautiful expression, 9/10 concealed inmost soul, which gives us hope that yes, 1/10 of it is still visible to us. And as we grow deeper and deeper, the more we liberate it, it is this inner light which has the capacity to be our guide in our day-to-day life on what and how we need to embrace our outer life. The working of the divine force in us under the conditions of the transition and the light of the psychic being, turning us always towards a conscious and seeing obedience to that higher impulsion and away from the demands and instigation of the forces of the ignorance. So this psychic being in the phase of transition always turns us towards a conscious and seeing obedience towards the higher impulsion, and has the capacity to turn us away from the demands and constant instigations of the forces of ignorance. So to summarize the key insights and actionables from today's talk, the first being, we can all reflect and introspect on the two measures that Sri Aurobindo gives out of progress or growth on the path of yoga. How much do we evoke those virtues within us? And also, to what intensity does our consciousness merge with the experience of the divine presence and power in our day to day life. One may give oneself a number on a scale of 0 to 10. Secondly, the second insight being to be able to reflect upon the three fundamental realizations and their unifying aspect, and to be able to meditate upon them and bring them more and more forward in our daily life. And third, actionable can be to open up more and more to the psychic being, liberate the psychic being more and more, and bring it forward in our day-to-day life, in the day-to-day life challenges and questions that we have. Thank you.